Thank you. It's great to be here, and thank you for the privilege of it. My name's David Larson. I'm from South Africa, and it's my second time at this conference, and it's a great privilege to be speaking to you on the digitization of the ANC archive. I want to speak to you about digitization, preservation, and presentation of the archive. This archive project started in 2011, and has been going on up until now. Just maybe some of you don't know much about the ANC archive. Maybe this will just give you a bit of an introduction.
In a beautiful remote corner of the Eastern Cape, hidden away within the walls of the renowned Fort Hare University, lies a treasure trove of historical records telling the story of the liberation of South Africa. Photographs, videos, audio recordings, artifacts gathered from many sources around the world. And at its core, the ANC archives.
So the South African government was consolidating a new level of resistance, armed conflict. They created that. They forced us into it. We surely cannot lose this war.
The masses of the people, the workers, the peasants, the doctors, the lawyers, the clergy, all our people, I have seen them making history.
And that's certainly true. Within the ANC archive, there's a lot of just normal history of people who were thrown into kind of a situation where they had to stand up against a great evil in society, and they were just normal people. And you can actually see that in the archive. And the archive covers photographs and posters, and it's got a lot of documents, badges and museum objects, and also video and also audio files. And yeah, even this is a record cover. So this archive also covers a period from right from the beginning, 1912, all the way up to sort of the end of apartheid and even a little bit beyond that. And it's actually been gathered as well ongoingly, but at the University of Fort Hare is that sort of period in time. And this is a young Cyril Ramaphosa when he was at Samafco up in Tanzania. And it also covers material that comes from Europe and from the anti-apartheid movement in other parts of the world, which is also a wonderful resource in the archive. What really happened in terms of the digitization is that the ANC was having a 100-year celebration around 2012, and then they approached an organization which is a broadcaster called MultiChoice, because they thought they had the skills to actually digitize the archive, and asked them, please, could they be involved in digitizing this archive? MultiChoice said yes, and the archive is housed at the University of Fort Hare. And then as they got into it, they realized they didn't really have the skills, and that's when they approached us. And so we then were brought on board, and originally they asked, can you digitize the entire lot? Can you do the audio visuals and everything and manage the whole lot? And at that stage we said, no, we're not prepared to do that. We want to stay within our bounds of what we're good at. And so we said we would take on the the paper records and the negatives and transparencies and photographic records. Audio-visual then was to be put out to other organizations that we had been working with, DOCSA for the video, and the International Library of African Music at Rhodes University for the audio. And in those days, that's 2011, 2012, we were using flatbed scanners, and it was an extremely slow process, but we kind of got through enough material to be able to have something for the centenary celebrations. We also did some training of local people in the area from other institutions around, just so that they are also engaging with archiving and digitization. And this was the team. This was the team for that first initial project. And it was a really successful project because we were all working to our strengths. And then we got to present to the president. That was President Zuma at the time, at around the time of the ANC 100-year celebration. This was at the University of Fort Hare. Then there was a big opening of the archive up in Johannesburg with the president as well. So at the end of that phase, really, we had accomplished very little. Only 20,000 photographs, 24,000 document pages, just over 1,000 video and audio files, and 300 museum objects. But we realized the archive is very much bigger than that, and we motivated and wrote proposals and all that. And then by November 2015, we were brought back and to start another project. And the first part of that project was to itemize everything, because the archive had been ordered down to the folder level, but not to the item level. So we spent 9 months just itemizing material, even before we started bringing any scanning machines in, and ordering the archive, which carried on while we digitized in parallel. And we used several different workflows. One was just a plain paper workflow, and we used this ScanMax machine, which is a belt-driven form feed scanner, very gentle on pages. It's a German product. And then we used the Atisbrook drive, which we modified because we were unhappy with what it was giving us, and we managed to modify it and get us what we wanted out of it. And then we were capturing negatives and transparencies on high-end sort of DSLRs. And then for fragile manuscripts, we were using phase one, an XF camera, and also for another sort of parallel workflow. Here we're digitizing posters. We were using a 100 megapixel phase back with an Alpha FPS 12 camera and Rodenstock lenses. That camera we've used in various ways. This is a 9-meter long painting by 1.5 meter high, and we digitized it in sections, and then none of you need to be convinced of the quality of these cameras. And that was the team that we had at that second phase of the project, and which was very much bigger. So we had digitized 83,000 photographs and 1.8 million document pages, and then 3,000 flat objects, and then the metadata as well, about 30,000 images that we've had captured metadata, 12,000 of which we had to kind of do forensic metadata investigation, because the information in the archive itself was so bad, and we had to kind of reconstruct it, and we had some really very clever PhD kind of people working on that for us. And then obviously 2,000 metadata of documents. And so that really was the digitization and the capture of the material. And then how do we store it? How do we look after it? Well, early days we had a server stack sitting at the University of Fort Hare. For various reasons, it proved difficult to manage it there, connectivity issues and so on. So we moved it to our own data center that we built, which had a server room with biometric access and all the, the fire retardant things in place. And then that's backed up to a separate building where our main offices are, and to LTO tape, and also to Blu-ray disc, because that gives us a write-once media option, which is impervious to ransomware and other such threats. And so, yeah, we were constructing a very sort of a system, a digital repository that has checks and balances, and even those Blu-ray discs are kept 20 kilometers away in a safe, in a fireproof safe, and so on. And then we also have a web server that sits in a data center here in Johannesburg. And so really trying to make that available to the world in a fairly reliable way. I think we could have done things better at times, but I think we've kind of consistently got there with backup power and backup internet service and all sorts of things. So bit by bit, we've built it. And then to actually present the archives, originally there was a public site constructed by another company, and then we had a research site that you could make application on the public site for access to the research archive. And that was sitting on our old MEMAT 3 system, which we developed, and which got rather long in the tooth and dated. So we started to look around, how can we create better solutions for this? And there were two projects that inspired us in that, and one was actually a project that we did with the Brenthurst Library and the Rijksmuseum. So we were digitizing material for of the Gordon papers for the Brenthurst, who were pushing that through to a Goede Hoop exhibition here at the Rijksmuseum. And just in terms of how the Rijksmuseum then presented that online was really lovely. And you can actually go and see this Robert Gordon website. And you could actually interact with the materials online, the high res. And we thought that was fantastic. And then there was another project we did with the Google Cultural History project. And we were shooting isiXwexwe materials from Ezekiel Museums in Cape Town. And again, they presented that really beautifully online. Now, we kind of knew about, Sea Dragon and other sort of technologies for presentation, and we were working with, we were getting a supply of digitization software from LIM, and they were using IIIF, and that's where we heard about IIIF. And then we were here in 2017 and got to hear more in depth from Stuart Snyder's about IIIF, and we were sold on it. And so then we've started to build that into our systems. And so we've got now a research website that is built on two different platforms. We decided to use an open source CMS, and we looked at Drupal and Joomla and WordPress, and we decided to use WordPress simply because everybody knows how to use WordPress, so teaching users how to use it was really straightforward. I know there are issues around its security, but actually at its core, it's just as secure as Drupal. So if you just manage the windows into it. And so then we started to use IIIF on the system as well. And that should have been a video to play. Okay, so here's the front end. We can search for materials, view them online, and then if you're logged in, then you can come through to the universal viewer and start to kind of actually engage with materials more in depth. And this doesn't just work for photographs, but also for manuscripts. And so we've been kind of applying it to manuscripts. So kind of the holy grail for us was that we wouldn't just be able to search across many manuscripts, but within manuscripts as well. And at the IIIF conference last year, I met a great crowd in London called Digerati, who were able to do that for us. And so they've developed a system for us that allows us to search within manuscripts that uses Google Vision for its OCR. And then we were also using IIIF in our metadata application. So here I'm logged in as the administrator, and I've just assigned a whole lot of material to a particular metadata capturer. Now I've logged in as a metadata capturer, and now I can start to add material in the Dublin core fields or whichever metadata schema you want to use, and I can also view, kind of scroll in and view closer to the object. So we've developed this sort of web interface that really allows open access for researchers, but also licensing for publishers and broadcasters. And much of the material in the ANC archive is not you don't know the provenance. It was a liberation archive gathered from many, many different places. And so we've had to do really careful due diligence, copyright research whenever someone wants to use it for broadcast or for publishers, and we assist the ANC in that. So just in conclusion, this project has been a really significant project for South Africa. It's been a catalyst for digitization. Google actually commissioned a report from the Economist Intelligence Unit called The New Age of Culture, and looking at digitization initiatives around the world and what countries are doing well and which are not. They only evaluated 2 countries in Africa, Kenya and South Africa was coming second. So the biggest economy in Africa, not doing so well. And so, yeah, what this project has really been very exciting, what's been exciting about it is it's a local initiative. It was initiated by the ANC. They approached MultiChoice. It's been funded by MultiChoice, which is a South African company. It's, the custodian of the physical archive is the University of Fort Hare, and then they were using local expertise in Africa Media Online. So that is very significant because projects in right across Africa up to now have been foreign funded primarily, and many of them have ended up actually not being sustainable long term. There was a project by the Mellon Foundation digitizing liberation history. That project, all that material sits on a server at the UKZN and is not accessible anymore. And so those are the kind of projects that can happen. So yeah, that brings us to, it's also been a catalyst for preservation. We were involved in writing the best practices for the National Digitization Policy, and in that policy, we recommended that there would be data centers in different parts of the country. That hasn't come to pass. And so we've really just got on with building a data center that can kind of do this thing for long-term preservation. And we're wanting to go for this standard ISO 16363. We haven't got there yet. There's a long way to go, but that's what we want to do. We want to build a data center that right across our country and other parts of Africa, people can reliably place their content with us. But there have been some victories. This is the ANC Archives Committee just after presenting to the President and the NEC of the ANC, and we were going for an agreement that the government would take responsibility for looking after the archives, not just of the ANC, but all the political parties in South Africa, and the agreement was just reached, and you can see the smiles on people's faces. And we've been setting up a trust. In our context, government isn't necessarily always, and many other nations around the world, if you're in Europe or North America, you think government is going to be the safest repository of your heritage. That's not necessarily true in every nation around the world. And so really we wanted to set up a trust that can have government, can have business, can have civil society, can have others all involved in terms of the preservation of our heritage. And so we've kind of set up a Digitize Africa Trust, and we're hoping that that is going to be accepted. And then finally, a catalyst for technological innovation. We're wanting to make our MENAT system, which I've been showing you, open source, and we're busy raising funds for that, and wanting to make it interface with other open source systems like Archivematica and Atom and Fedora and Oral History, Metadata Synchronizer and PageFlow, and Stories and many others. So yeah, so finally, there's more to be done. There's 797 more boxes in the vaults at University of Fort Hare. We've got lots and lots of metadata still to be done, and we've set up a community, hopefully getting volunteers over time, Metadata for Africa, which allows them to work online. And finally, digital repatriation. This is Kier Schuringer from the International Institute of Social History here in Amsterdam, and he's been very helpful. He's a real anti-apartheid activist in his day, and he's an archivist there. And so, yeah, there's many other materials to be brought back from Russia, from the States, and so on, to add to this archive to get a full picture of what is going on. So thanks very much for your time.
was great. Carolina, for a second presentation.
Thank you. Now let's see. Oh yes, my voice is out here. So thank you. I am going to not talk so much about the digital stuff, more the human beings, but I will try to combine this in a good way, I think. First, thank you for the invitation. Very interesting talks both today and yesterday. And yes, my name is Carolina Gustafsson, and I have come here today as in my role as a supervisor over this department up in the long word Kiruna Center for Conservation of Cultural Property. In Swedish, it's Stiftelsen Föremålsvård. A little bit more simple for me. So my plan today is to give you a brief history of how we came to be, what and how we are doing today, and to finish up with some few things to consider when starting a project. And I would need this thing. So it's a little bit not working as well as I hoped, but anyways, the idea is just to show you where we are located. So 200 kilometers north of the polar circle. It's quite a unique spot, but as you can see here on the map, this gray area there is the world's largest iron ore mine. The rest is the town. It's like the same size there. So you understand that the fluctuations in the prices of iron ore will affect the community quite radically. And in the early 80s, the iron ore mine prices dropped. So, of course, a lot of people went without jobs. But the government, as the state owns half of the mining company. So some brilliant minds in the government started to think, like, what can we do to support the community? So they come up with this idea to combine cultural heritage politics with employment politics. So what happened? They went to the biggest institutions, National Library, National Archive, and the historical museums. And they asked for help with conservation because they saw the state of their collections. And in 1987, the Center of Conservation of Cultural Property was born. So there we are in an old school building, and over to your left there you see the mine. I'm going to show you all these pictures here are photographs from all the different institutions we work for. And I can just say in the beginning, now we are working 2D, not 3D up at our place. So yes, a state foundation. We are founded by the National Library and the National Archives and the historical museums. And back then, it was, as I mentioned before, that it was conservation that they were asking for foremost. So we have two departments called the Conservation of Metal and Archaeological Materials and Conservation of Paper and Textiles. These are not the people working up there. So professionals from both abroad and the state national institutions, they came up to Kiruna to educate those people that were interested in working with this conservation. And those who started out 30 years ago, they either worked until pension or some of them are actually still going strong up there. But nowadays, they only hire people that would have a degree in conservation. They also offer internships for students and also developing new methods when it comes to conservation. But my department then, digitization. For natural reasons, we were born around 10 years later, as the digitization hadn't really started yet in 1987. A commission was appointed by the Minister of Culture in 1993 to review the publicly financed museums in Sweden. And the purpose was to study the structure of the museums and their coordination, in particular to find more effective means of using available resources. So, therefore, between 95 and 97, the government took an initiative and funded a project they called the Sessie project, meaning open the cave where the collections are hidden to make the treasure more accessible to all. And maybe more also accessible than the analog distribution that you can see here on the picture. So, the Sesame project, that had turned out to be a great success, was the start of our department. The government decided to continue the project on a bigger scale, and this is a very bad translation, but it was called IT of the Cultural Heritage. And the Department of Digital Imaging was created. With this bigger project, the aim was to, as I mentioned before, to make the collections of the national cultural heritage institutions more accessible, but the second aim was also to provide work for people who would have some sort of disability that made it hard for them to find a so-called regular job. So the deal is also that we, as we are state-funded, we don't charge these the other state-funded institutions. So they are almost getting the job for free, except for transportation costs or any material that we would need to care for their collections. So this is how we look a little bit like today, a little bit pixelated here, I see, I'm afraid. I'm sorry about that. But some of these, actually most of these, started out 20 years ago, and they are still working here. So even with so-called reduced work performance, they have been able to do this for many, many years. But I will get back to how to make that happen. So, what do we do? I just wanted to say thanks to Jay that was talking about the DDT thing, because quite often we forget that we need to handle things. It's not just about putting something into a, to make a perfect digital file. We also have items that we need to handle. We have slides we might need to demount from their frames. This all takes time, and you need to, be careful how you handle the collections. So, what do? We prepare and care for the collections, meaning that we clean and we package them so their conditions are up to date. We digitize them and we register the post connected to the image. At the moment, we service 14 different archives, libraries, and museums, all state-owned. But they are still very different. Still, some of them are big and they have a lot of resources, a lot of knowledge in the field, and other ones are very small and they mightn't have as much. So the material is mainly photographic. It is printed photographs. It is glass negatives, one image from Erik's collection. He talked yesterday from the Historical Museum. Color negatives, slides, and unfortunately it's also very bad resolution here, but I just stop here for a second as we're talking about, colors and what is true, what is a true color. So obviously all of us working in the archival and museum business, we want to make sure it is the thing, it is what is real we want to have in our archives. But in this case, for example, the institution, the Nordic Museum, they wanted one image that would be of the actual slide, how the slide looks like now. But they also wanted a JPEG file that they could present in their digital systems that would be what they thought how the picture looked like when it was taken in the 1940s, 50s. And how do you know this? I mean, that's up to the museum because they are the experts on this. They also wanted us to take away scratches, dust, dirt, any damages on this particular collection then. But that is all different. It's not all of them that wants this. And then last addition to our family of machines is a big A0 flatbed scanner. We only work with scanners at the moment, but are looking into changing up there. So we digitize fragile drawings, fragile posters, things that wouldn't be able to go through a normal rolling scanner. So today it also looks very pixelated, as you can see, I'm afraid. But we have, since the start, worked in the environmental, like the work environment is, according to the ISO standards that tells us, about the lighting in the room, make sure that no daylight comes in, which can be a little bit hard when you live 200 kilometers north of the polar circle where you don't have any daylight during a certain period of the year, but we have daylight inside of the rooms. It's 5,000 K, so it's good. But as we know, the digital techniques and the applications are in constant development. So we, of course, we as supervisors also need to be on our toes. So a big part of our job is to make sure that our qualifications and techniques are up to date. And that's why we also are here today, of course, to learn from you guys as well. But the whole point of this is also that a small institution that wouldn't have the knowledge can come to us and get their collections made available to all. But back to the humans. And the aim that, except for caring for the collections at our national cultural heritage institutions, we also have the goal to provide work for people with so-called reduced work performance. So when we employ people, we do this in close collaboration with the Swedish Employment Service. And therefore, we have a guy that works there that is like our guy. He's an officer there. So he knows our workplace very well. So he can recommend, when we have an open position, he can recommend certain individuals and suitable candidates for open positions. So these candidates, they come to us and they work for a week to try to see, okay, will this work for me? Because they need to be able to sit in front of a computer and digitize images, obviously, because that is what we do. So the Swedish Employment Service also helps with certain tools that the employee might need. Say, for example, a chair that can be adjusted exactly for that person, or a table or some other type of help. And the Swedish Employment Service is also the institution that decides how much economical support we get as an employer, which is a percentage of their salary. And we as supervisors, I say we because I'm here with my colleague Petra, that is in the audience here today, we are responsible for the education of all employees. And of course that the end result that reaches the institutions reaches up to standards. One thing that is usually the hardest thing to explain to people who would be in the business of digitization is that we can't really put pressure on the employees to deliver fast. We as supervisors, we have to take an account that employees are more often ill, and some of them are more sensitive to stress, and most of them has aches and pains in their bodies that can alter. Some days are better, some days are worse. So hence it's very hard to set numbers on production goals. But still we do just that. But the goals are adapted to each employee. And believe it or not, all the institutions have been very happy with this the last 20 years. We do regular surveys where they can express any betterments they might wish. And usually the institutions, they would choose projects that would be very big, like some of them has been going on for 10 years, because all of us that also work in these big national archives, they know that the collections are enormous. They will never end, actually. So, yeah, they are more interested in that when they send up material to us, that we will take care of their collections and that they are treated properly. And also that a whole big collection is actually digitized and finished. If they, for some reason, would need something out of the collection while we're having it up there at our place, we usually jump in as supervisors and take care of that order then. So, to make sure high-quality digital files are produced and delivered, it's crucial to make sure that the work environment is good and the amount of workload on each employee is suitable. So with this balance, we have managed to make sure both that our cultural heritage institutions are happy and made sure that people who otherwise wouldn't be working can do so and contribute into our aim to make our joint cultural heritage more accessible to all. In other words, a win-win situation. So I also promised some thoughts, and here it doesn't really matter that it's badly resolutioned because you can't read it because it's in Swedish. I promised some thought about what to think about when starting a project. and I'm sure many of you already have good routines. But I learned from a friend when I lived a short while here in Amsterdam that assumption is the mother of all fuck-ups, so I will go through this either way. The basic but also important thing is to make an agreement that is clear for both parts. We use an agreement or specification which the contact person at the institution signs. Some institutions, as I said, are more experienced, they have more knowledge, they know exactly what they want, so there it's no problem. But this is just a basic, like a deal there. As I said, they differ in knowledge. This is very important to me, as you hear, I say it many times. This type of workflow has worked quite well for us to be able to satisfy both big institutions and small institutions. And when we do the specification or the deal, when it comes to the smaller institutions, we kind of work that out in that area because they wouldn't even know really what they want. So we do test files, we send them down, they check them, they think, okay, well, this is actually something that will work for us. And when that is done, we start the whole process. And that is that. I will stop here. Thank you.
So for our last session, a hacking session actually, it's a tourism guide.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Renata Kaminska. I am a digitization studio manager on the BL-QNL partnership. Until 12 months ago, I thought that hacking was the preserve of geeks working on expensive technical equipment in darkened rooms.
Good afternoon. I'm Styris Alpanis. I'm the head of digital operations on the BL-QNL partnership. And until 12 months ago, I thought photography was the preserve of geeks working on expensive technical equipment in darkened rooms. So first of all, I'd like to introduce the British Library Qatar National Library Partnership. It's a 10-year partnership, and it's been active for just over 5 years. And so far, it's taken the form of a digitization project. We've digitized over 1.7 million images of material related to Gulf history and Arabic scientific manuscripts. And a big part of my role has been ensuring that the process and the workflow is nice and consistent and predictable, and we know that we can upload material on a regular basis. This is really nicely demonstrated by the images you see here, which show the need for visual consistency that's implemented through strict imaging and quality assurance processes. The team working on the BL-QNL partnership consists of just over 45 people working in the British Library in St Pancras, and there's a range of skills and expertise within the team. So we have experts in Gulf history, translators, and as well a team of 8 dedicated imaging professionals who work in our imaging studio. We're all co-located on the 6th floor, and as a result, we have a really nice, open, communicative environment. It's fairly non-hierarchical, and we can really collaborate nicely. So next, I'd like to introduce the topic for our discussion today, and to tell you a little bit of the history of how we came up with the Imaging Hack Day and what an Imaging Hack Day is. So as I mentioned, we're digitizing material and we send it onto a web portal, the Qatar Digital Library. And this portal was developed in partnership with a web development agency called COGAP. And a couple of years ago, I was visiting their offices in Brighton, and they were telling me about their hack days. And they set aside one day every quarter to for their developers to use their coding skills and to experiment and come up with some projects. There's an emphasis that They don't have to be entirely serious sort of experiments, but it's a way of people expanding their skills and having a bit of fun without the sort of risk of showing themselves up. And I thought this is a great idea. However, our team had one developer and not many other people had coding skills. So it's not something that we could implement. However, last summer, we had a talk from the then head of imaging services, Kira Zumkley, who I think might be in the room today. And she talked about how the imaging services department at the Science Museum Group gave their imaging technicians license to be creative, so to capture elements of the collection items they're digitizing, which might not be seen, and to play around with lighting and different imaging techniques. And that's when it struck me that although we don't have coding and that kind of technical skills, we have a plethora of technical skills in our imaging studio. So the painful process of having an idea happened, and I suggested to Renata that we could run some imaging hack days. And from that point, having spoken with Renata and the team, they took over, and we've run 2 imaging hack days, and they've been hugely successful. And over the rest of the presentation, we'd like to use some of the examples of hacks to demonstrate the benefits that we've experienced.
When planning Hack Day, we didn't know how the team is going to approach the activity and what impact, if any, it will have. Firstly, we noticed team's increased engagement with the collection. The team approached hacking from many different angles. Some told stories found in collection items, explored visual and physical qualities of collection, and others analyzed cataloging data and even created educational resources. Matt's hack evolved from his interest in collecting parallel or similar things. He created typologies from images of names, stamps, and signatures, to name just a few. He aimed to reveal patterns and encouraged us to make comparisons. Also to draw our attention to details that are not evident when you look at digitized image individually. These hacks have been influencing Matt's daily digitization tasks ever since. On the second hack day, the team was responding to an International Women's Day theme. And Matt selected at random one collection item and highlighted all the text and cut out all the text which was relating to gender. He then put it together in one image, as you can see over there on the left, and highlighted one gender in order to make a comparison. So Melanie was interested in purely visual qualities of digitized collection. She was reflecting on how imaging technicians engage with digitized content on a daily basis when looking through hundreds of images. And the wider BL/QNL team who's used to looking at digitized content from the perspective of reader or researcher, really appreciated this new perspective. Jordi and I hacked together an Islamic scientific manuscript related to astronomy. I digitized its pages on a contrasting paper to emphasize the damage made by insects. Later, the pages were digitally removed to even more emphasize this damage. Jordi then combined the images into an animation, and you can see the result over here.
I'm not just saying this because Renata's here, but this is genuinely my favorite hack that we've done. I say that to everyone. What it does is it really emphasizes a key part of the material that is lost during our standard digitization process, as well as being a really good example of collaboration between our imaging team and the conservation team. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that.
Another benefit of running Hack Days was creating platform for the imaging and wider team to collaborate. So Daniel paired up with Louis Alday, golf history cataloging manager, in order to do image colorization. They set out to colorize a black and white portrait of the Sheriff of Mecca. Louis speculated that
the turban would have been white, a colour of turban that was often worn by Sayyids, and as worn by a later Sheriff of Mecca, Hussein.
He also suggested that the gown
would be similar to European-style dress, dark navy blue with gold detailing, as a dress of late Ottoman-era officials such as this was heavily influenced by European military form at the time.
The last piece of clothing to color was the sash across the body, which Louis reasoned
would possibly be green, a colour also closely associated with the Prophet, his family, and his descendants.
The idea for hacks genuinely surprised us with their ambition. And some required learning new tools and skills. Louisa was interested in making QDL content accessible for users who may be not familiar with Middle Eastern history. Combining storytelling, maps, and images, she created an interacting version of a journey by a political resident, Jeffrey Pryor, from Bahrain to Muscat in 1940. We can start exploring? Yeah, great. The story map transports the viewer to different locations where events took place. She used an open source JavaScript tool called StoryMap, which can be embedded into a website. The hack generated a lot of interest for telling stories in similar ways. It also impressed library's digital scholarship team. And later on, they used it as their training tool. Perhaps it is not visible at this moment, but when you hover with your mouse around the map, yes, you can see a pin of the exact location where each event took place. And also there are links below images which take you directly to the QDL. Is this the last? Can we go to the last one? Yeah, that's how the image looks on the QDL portal. Okay, thank you.
Can we switch back to the presentation,
Oh, great.
please?
Yes. Hannah was interested in data visualization. An extract from her blog says, using the Kata Digital Library, she collected a set of data on the reliability of the search engine to source photographs of women. Using this information, Hannah created a zine called She Was Here. Its aim is to highlight photographs of women in the collection, particularly where the search engine has not given them appropriate prominence. Hannah continues. The zine is also a collection of experimentations on representing data in imaginative ways. Hannah used visual techniques to comment on the lack of information recorded about women, while giving them space and focus outside of the archive. Darren and Jordi were both interested in an astrolabe quadrant from an Islamic scientific manuscript. Jordi experimented with new lightening techniques to focus on its texture and emphasize its beauty as an artifact. Darren, however, was interested in its practical function and educational qualities. He went to make a how-to guide on how to use and make your very own astrolabe.
And this project by Darren has led to a conversation with the British Library's Learning Department, and we're really hoping that we can convert these two hacks into an educational resource that's available through the British Library's website.
Hack Days gave an opportunity for the imaging team to show their individual skills to the wider team. And the timing was especially appropriate because many of the members of the imaging has just joined the project.
And the poster you can see on the left-hand side, of the right-hand side of the screen here, formed part of a guerrilla marketing scheme undertaken by the imaging team. So early one morning, before anyone else was in the office, they came in and plastered these posters all over every surface they could find.
As the posters appeared around the office, the whole project was excited about the talent and the creative energy the team presented. As a result, ideas were born outside of Hack Days. For instance, illustrations were created for our contextual articles, or the imaging team engaged with our project's Twitter account. So building on the work of Hack Day, which focused on women, Rebecca engaged with project's Twitter account and tweeted her hacks for 8 days running up to the International Women's Day. In the weeks following each day, each Hack Day, members of the imaging team published a series of blog posts for the library's digital scholarship blog. We also gave talks and show and tells in other departments in the library and to external visitors. And finally, based on the success of Hack Day, our colleagues from COGAP invited us to their offices in order to participate in one of their own Hack Days.
Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we work in this open and collaborative environment, so feedback is really important. So I'd like to talk about some of the methods we've used to get feedback. So from the imaging team, we ran retrospectives after the hack days, and this was concentrated on how can we make the hack days more effective and improve them for the future. From the wider team, we produced a survey asking their opinion, what did they like, what did they dislike, and do they have any ideas for future themes. And then from everyone else, we've talked about it on as many platforms as we can find. So we've blogged about it, talked about it on Twitter, and it's also brought us to Amsterdam to present to you today. Next, I'd like to just talk, with any new process, there are challenges. And I think it was Big Daddy Kane who first said that hacking ain't easy. So next, I'd like to go through a couple of the challenges and how we've tried to overcome them. So as I mentioned at the beginning, with this well-oiled machine of consistency, and without that, I don't think we would have been able to take a day off from our day job to do this. Second of all, the imaging team put in a lot of their effort and their work into the hacks that they produced, and that gave them a sense of ownership over them, and they would really like to potentially exhibit them in the future. So we worked closely with our rights clearance team to work out a license that would allow that to happen. Next, when collaboration has happened, it's been great, but we've found more often than not that people are working on their own, and that brings with it a certain amount of pressure. So in future hack days, Renata and I are planning to put more emphasis on team building before the hack day to try and get people to work together and be more collaborative. And the last one is kind of an interesting problem to have. With success comes a certain amount of increase in expectation. So we had reports from the imaging team that they wanted to do the best job they could, and they were working extra hard, and actually it brought about a certain sense of pressure and expectation. So again, in the future, we're going to emphasize collaboration and emphasize having more fun, and there's no need for it to be a finished product at the end of the day.
I would like to end this presentation with acknowledgements and thank yous. And firstly, I would like to thank the imaging team, because without them, these hack days wouldn't happen. They brought amazing amount of enthusiasm and creative potential. So thank you. And I also would like to thank the rest of the QNL team for taking part in collaborations, British Library's Digital Scholarship for their support and publishing our blogs, and you organizers of this conference for giving us a platform to speak about this idea.
And if I may just add, sorry, one more thank you. I'd like to thank Renata and the imaging team, who I'm reliably told are watching on the live stream. Get back to work. For taking this slightly harebrained idea and running with it and making the success that I hope this presentation shows it has been. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to, the speakers, do you want to take your seats over there? I think there's enough chairs, 4 of you. I think you'll agree, 3 really interesting presentations. I've got lots and lots of questions, but I'm not going to take all the time up, so we'll open it out to the floor. If I may just ask one question of each of those to get us going. David, I'm going to start with David. Interesting. You spoke at the end about I didn't quite get the sense. Is it nearly finished? Will you finish it all, the archive?
Yes, so we've put forward for new phases, so there are a bunch more new phases to go. As I showed, there's 797 boxes still to be done at the University of Fort Hare, but then there's been materials since democracy to the present that has been gathering as well, that isn't there at the University of Fort Hare, so that needs to be done. And then material that is from other parts of the world.
So you'll continue to take stuff in, so it
Yeah.
may never get actually finished, is what, I suppose what I'm getting at. But,
Yeah.
But you'll
Yeah,
have a good go.
I think it will be ongoing, but it tends to be by project. Yeah.
Thank you. And Carolina, well, mine's more a comment, actually. I think it's great that you're working with people who would otherwise have barriers to work. It's actually something that we're looking at Welcome as well. So, you know, to say fantastic. And actually, it's lovely to hear that a country is taking its cultural heritage so seriously and funding the digitisation of it. I mean, I did have one quick question, I suppose. I didn't get any sense of, is all the digitisation done on your site, or do you actually go to places to digitise content that you can't move?
It's done on site.
It's all done on, okay, so it's all moved to.
Yeah.
And what are the challenges with that?
Well, it's transportation, of course.
Yeah.
So, like, we couldn't do certain things that would be, you know, really, really precious.
Sure.
So, because it's a matter of security. So, hence, I mean, we do transport things every 3 months, I'd say. And that has, again, also worked very, very well. So, but then, and also it's big collection, so it would be pallets of stuff that comes up, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Usually.
Thank you. And last but not least, really interesting. I suppose my question would be, is there anything in those hack days that you could take forward and actually apply to the day job? I know you've got to get numbers done and you've got to get this content digitised, but is there anything, do you feel, that you might be able to build into your, you know, to the ongoing day job, as it were?
Hello? I think Renato and I have both been surprised at how effective the hack days have been, the experiments have been. And, you know, at the beginning, we said we don't expect any sort of working product at the end, but we've been kind of surprised by how sensible a lot of the ideas are. And to give an example, the typographies that Matt does, that were near the start of the presentation, recently he produced a custom one for a particular shelf mark, which had been written about in one of our contextual pieces. So it's not quite day-to-day, but it's an activity that will become ongoing, hopefully.
And sorry, one more. I was going to squeeze one more in. And so you're going to keep doing these hack days, I take it. So this is now sort of.
Yeah, we did the second one quite quickly after the first one. We got a bit excited, and there was International Women's Day, so there was a bit of time pressure, and actually maybe that contributed to the pressure that the imaging team felt. So we're still working out the ideal spacing, but I think we're going to do another one in August.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to open up to the floor. I've got loads more questions, but let's give other people a chance. I think I saw a hand. 2 hands. Up in the middle. Behind you. If you sling it back.
I have a question first for David. I was wondering, because you said there was a survey and there were just 2 African countries and South Africa was second. Is there any notion or clue on how much documents and archives are in danger in the whole of Africa? Because I can imagine that if we are talking about an ambulance or a Prince Claus Fund thing, Africa would be the place to start working in archives.
So I don't have any kind of quantifiable notion. I'm obviously aware of collections that are in danger. Part of why we wanted to start this Digitize Africa Trust was that we do come across collections that are not being looked after, not particularly sustainable in terms of the institution or the organization that's looking after it, having the funds to be able to look after it properly. And so, yeah, so I think there's a lot of material out there that does need to be looked after in that way. And yeah, we just didn't have a sort of vehicle for kind of intervening in that way. I'm delighted to hear the Prince Claus Fund does that sort of thing. But I think there's a lot of potential for rescuing collections that are genuinely valuable for posterity and for not just for those nations, but for the world, for the heritage of the world. Yeah.
I think there you go, in the middle there.
Hi, I have a question for the guys from the British Library. Did you consider taking part to the Museumix community, since it's a hackathon format that is already set and has a few years of experience? And if not, why do you know Museumix at least? Or
I think this is why we come to conferences, right? So we learn about these things. I was unaware. Were you unaware? Did you know about this particular hackathon?
No, I didn't.
okay.
Kira there.
Also a question for Sotirios and Renata. Hi. I was wondering, when you were setting up your hack day, 2 questions. So, have you had issues with senior management to persuade them that an entire day that you could have spent producing more numbers, to spend that having fun, essentially? And then, in your feedback from your team since, have you got anything that goes towards an increase of well-being and happiness with their job, and just anything that kind of is more quantifiable for senior management for them to be happy to implement hack days, maybe in other institutions as well?
So, Sotirios did all the persuading, so you can talk about that.
I mean, as I said, it was a bit of a harebrained scheme, and we only intended to do one to begin with. Because we had that reassurance that we were being productive on a daily basis, and we track all of our metrics and everything, we could be pretty sure that we could afford a day off. There was a really interesting, after the first hack day, there was a really interesting sort of side effect where, because the imaging team had enjoyed that particular one so much, they actually came in the next week, and there were 2 remaining days of the month where they needed to make up X amount of images, and they worked really hard to make sure that they achieved their target, so it wouldn't be perceived that the hack day had cost the targets. As a result of that and some feedback from the team, we've actually ensured that any hack days happen towards the start of the month, so that we have any time to make up against our targets. And that was an idea that came up from the imaging team in the retrospective, so it just shows how important feedback is. But in terms of persuading senior management, I guess we're slightly separate from a lot of the rest of the library, so we have a mandate, or I've taken upon myself to have a mandate to experiment and to push these new ideas. As a result of the hack days, I think we've demonstrated clearly that you can do both, and actually it has a really positive effect on motivation for the imaging team. You know, we employ creative people and ask them to do fairly mundane tasks. And one last bit, you know, we found that a lot of the hacks people were kind of doing in their own time, or starting, you know, had ideas and were doing bits and pieces. And we've just opened up the opportunity for them to do it. So it's a win-win situation.
Thank you.
I think just to add to that, from our own experiences, whilst we don't do hack days, we have taken the approach where people are digitising things like manuscripts. If they find interesting things within those manuscripts that they can photograph in a slightly different way, that I've encouraged that. And I can say quite categorically, it hasn't actually affected the productivity. What it's done, it's created a better product, and it's got the photographer to engage with the with the content a bit more. So, you know, as you say, it's a win-win. I can't see the downside of this, if I'm honest. Got another one over there, have we?
Okay, it worked, I think. I have a question for David, which is totally not photography question, so maybe I shouldn't ask it. You are digitizing and archiving the materials from the ANC and other political parties. Do I understand it correctly?
So at the moment, that project is just the ANC archive. We have put in proposals to do a number of the other liberation parties, the PAC, AZAPO, and so on, which is also housed at the NAHEX building at the University of Fort Hare. But the vast majority of material in that archive is ANC, and the ANC themselves had secured the funding to do that. There is the proposal, that's kind of what we went to the NEC of the ANC about, was to get this agreement that the state should actually be looking after the archives of all the political parties.
Okay, so I would like to follow up. I come from Poland, and I can imagine that this state, or the party that is in power at the moment, might find the materials from other political parties very interesting, not really for the archival or historical purposes. What about the sensitivity of the materials? A mouse is running through the podium.
Look, I think those materials are available in the university. Generally, brave mouse.
It's going for lunch, I think.
So yeah, those collections are available to researchers anyway. Digitizing them obviously will make it more accessible, but they're available anyway. They're not in any dark archive.
I think we've got time for another one, have we, Cecile? Can I see any more hands? If not, can we just one last round of applause for the break?